I'm Brad Lamack in Los Angeles, and today we are inside the business of acting with a guy who, if you look up his name in, well, you should. If you looked up your name in a dictionary under working actor, you know, that it ought to have your picture. Hal Linden is here, and I'm delighted that he's here to talk about the journey of his career. That's what we do on this series. The Business of Acting is the title of a book that I wrote. I'm a talent manager, and we are here to let you listen in on our conversations about the experiences, the careers of working actors and industry professionals in this business, so that a lot of this conversation can empower you on your career journey, whether you are just beginning and transitioning from college to the real world, or whether you have been in this business and are looking for new ways to think about how to be in the business. And also, we don't want to forget about you people who are just fans of television and entertainment, and the people who are kind enough to be here on this program. We welcome you on the World Wide Web, wherever on the planet that you are watching us. And I thank you so much. It's wonderful to meet you.
Pleasure.
We have never met, but I've admired your work and your career for many years. You really do define what one would think of as a career working actor.
When I lived in New York, there was I always had three signs that I had made it.
What were they?
One was, let me see what I remember. Well, one was to be a definition in the New York Times. Crossword puzzle,
right.
Yes, and I got that real early. And then second one was to get a Nina in my hair. Do you know where that is? That's the cartoonist.
Yes.
Oh, I can't think of his name. You know, the famous cartoonist.
Hirschfeld. Yes, of course.
And if he really likes you, he'll have a Nina in your hair or in your jabot or wherever he can sneak Ninas. And I was, I think, a 4 Nina. That was a really big thing. The last thing, there was 2 theaters at the corner of 96th Street and Broadway, movie theaters. Mm-hmm. And the manager of those theaters had a sense of humor. So he used to bill. He used to put up his own billing, of course, on the theaters. It wasn't a first-run house. It was, so it would say, he would always bill actors who lived on the West Side near the theater. So it would say, Charade, or Eli Wallach in Charade. Also, Cary Grant. Actually, that was Walter Matthau in Charade. That was Walter Matthau in Charade, because Walter lived a few blocks away with Cary Grant. Eli Wallach in A Fistful of Dollars. Also, plenty.
Not actually legal billing, but who cared?
Who cared? It was and I couldn't wait to make that marquee.
And when did it happen?
Never did. They tore down the theaters. There's a big high-rise there now. Never.
Well, we'll do something on here. I promise. Of course, everybody knows you from your work on Barney Miller, and even though an actor like you has a body of work, oftentimes the double-edged sword of television is that success and the character created
everything you've done.
Yeah, before and since. Has that been okay?
You know, I mean, let's face it. I did, I think conservatively, over 20 Broadway productions. 20 off-Broadway and Broadway productions.
Before?
Some before, a few after.
And a Tony Award.
And a Tony Award. If you put all the people who saw me in all those years on Broadway and off-Broadway in all 20 of those productions, it wouldn't amount to half of the people who saw one episode of Barney Miller. So what do you expect? Yeah. That's the nature of the business, but it's okay. If you're going to be identified with a property, let it be one with the class of Barney Miller.
Yeah. Great actors, great writers, great crew.
You got the word. Great writers. It was the finest writing staff added up to that time.
It came out of an era of sitcom television that we don't really have that kind of sitcom anymore, and we see them, and the younger generation, they watch it on TV Land, they have, and DVDs, have a chance to watch it and be entertained by it. But the landscape even of how TV comedy is produced today is a different formula entirely.
Yes, it's much less. In those days, it was pretty much the work of whoever thought of it. It was the creator's work.
Right.
Barney Miller was created by Danny Arnold, who controlled it from day one until he retired it. It was never canceled. He just retired it because we ran out of good writers. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in sitcoms. It's why they always get less and less from year to year, because the first year you have maybe 5 writing sources, a team or an individual. And as soon as the show becomes a hit, everybody is after those writers.
Of course.
Every other network. And what are you going to say? Stay with us, or rather than do your own show? And so you're constantly losing all these writing sources, and eventually it becomes more difficult. And Danny at the end said, I can't do it anymore. We just don't have, everybody's been just repeating what we have, everything we did. Same joke, different setup.
But smart to recognize that journey of that show.
He said to us, I'm going to spend the next 2 months reading submissions from anyone who wants to submit. College kids, you name it. Anyone who, and he sat up in his office and read scripts for 2 months, and then he finally came down and said, it's not going to happen. Let's all move on. We've had a wonderful time, and he retired the show.
You also wore another hat on that show at a time, because you directed some episodes.
I directed quite
right?
a few, yeah. A few.
Yeah.
Noam Pitlick was the major director. In the beginning, it was difficult because Danny was such a strong force that we would bring in a director, and then just before we shot, Danny would redirect it. We kept losing directors that way, And then he brought in Noam Pitlick, who was a beginning director, and more or less taught him what he wanted him to do. And Noam was with us for years. But when Noam left, it kind of got lost again, and that's when I directed, and Max Gale directed, a few of us directed.
So what for you was it like to wear the different hat? I mean, a director who has been or is also an actor is a much different director than a guy or woman who's just a director.
In a sense, it wasn't that difficult on Barney, mainly because we didn't do it in the traditional way. Barney, after about the first 3 or 4 episodes, had no studio audience.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah,
why did you guys give up the studio audience?
I'll tell you why. After about 3 or 4 shows, Danny was a perfectionist, and we would come into rehearsal, and we'd only have the first act. We would just read the first act because they were still working on the second act. And little bit by little bit, he'd send down the pages, and by the 5th show or so, they didn't have the ending yet. So they canceled the audience because they want to see a full show, an ending.
Yeah.
And and the following week, the audience people said, "You can't do that. People, they come here to see a show. You can't just cancel on them." He said, "Well, you better not bring another audience." He said, "We don't have an ending for this week's show either." And we never had an audience again. And it turned out to be a godsend, really, for a show like Barney. Now, there were shows where the energy of an audience is wonderful. I did a few of them.
Yes.
Drew Carey's show was...
Will and Grace.
Will and Grace. A lot of shows which are more presentational, shall I say. But when you had a show as subtle as Barney, and this was where I had the experience to be able to direct it. Because you had to play it like a real play. You had to be real. Everybody had to be real. We had very few, particularly the the regulars. Everything, all those funny things we thought of in rehearsal, we cut them down and we stayed with the story. Because if you found out that the humor of the piece was not in the lines, was in the relationships. And it was easier to take a moment and work on it and find that relationship. And when it worked, it became funny. It's an amazing, amazing experience.
Yes.
But it was true for a show like Barney. Now,
Yeah.
there are a lot of shows who, you don't really need that because they're much more overt.
But the audiences, I think, sensed exactly what you're talking about.
The problem with an audience,
I mean, the live on the other side of the at home.
At home, of course.
The home audiences.
The audience.
They got that.
Oh, that was
Yeah.
the point.
Yeah.
That was the point. The tendency is to allow 400 tourists in Hollywood to dictate how you're going to edit the show. If this one gets a big laugh, let's put the camera on him, and we get a bigger laugh, and that's a big mistake.
Yeah.
George Abbott once said to me, never let an audience direct your show. You have to have the confidence that you know what the show has to be about and do it. And if it's a failure, tough. He says, I've had my failures, but I always knew that show that was what it was my concept of what it should be.
I think there's another piece of that too, is that in order to make that happen, you need trained actors, you need professional actors, you need people.
All the Barney Miller people were actors.
Yeah.
There were a few comedians, Ronnie Carey. I'm getting into that.
That's okay.
But most of us were actors. And that's how it worked best, when you acted the situation for real. You never let us, particularly the regulars, never let us go too far, because the bottom line for Danny was, would you go, if you did something funny but outrageous, he would say, would you go to a police officer who behaves like that for help?
Brilliant.
And if the answer is no, don't do it.
Yeah.
That's what keeps your characters alive for 8 years. You don't have to keep pumping them up because they're real for you from day one.
And what keeps the TV audiences at home coming back. And even now, when you can see the stuff, it's thank you for that, by the way. We thank you for that. We're going to leave those folks in just a minute. When we come back for segment 2, I want to go back pre-Barney Miller, because you and I have a history, sort of. We have a similarity, separated by a few years, but that's a good cliffhanger. But we have something in common, which we will talk about. We are talking about life inside the business of acting with Hal Linden, and what a delight to have him here to share his career journey with all of us. Join us for segment 2. We'll be back. I'm Brad LeMac in Los Angeles.